Hello everyone, welcome to From the Star Wars Library, where Star Wars is in print, the Force is with the readers, and the old comic smell permeates the air still. I'm your host, Nathan P. Butler. We return this time to the Marvel comic series, but for something a little different. Now, we've seen a couple of standalone stories in this series. We saw the standalone story back in issue number 16 that introduced Valence, and issue number 17 that had Luke thinking back to his days on Tatooine. Beyond that, though, we generally had larger story arcs. We've yet, though, to see much take place in terms of giant, long-run flashbacks. By long-run, in this case, I mean flashbacks that go back beyond just a matter of a few years, back maybe decades in this case. That we finally see here, in a story that is really an oddity in all of Marvel's era of Star Wars publishing. In fact, in a lot of ways, in Star Wars publishing up until around 2002, or at least around 1999, where they started to allow some exploration of the Old Republic era and then the Clone Wars era as well. It's issue number 24, known as Silent Drifting. This is our issue. Notice here who the main character is. Obi-Wan. Now, an all-new untold tale, Ben Kenobi fights alone. Silent Drifting. It is an oddity here. What do we have with this very unusual story? What we have, first off, it does something that the other ones tended not to do. Down here in the corner, note, this story takes place after the events of Star Wars number 15. So they're already shuffling the continuity here. They're saying, okay, here's issue 24. It's being released after the last story arc that took place mostly on the wheel, but since our characters went off in separate directions in that story, we can't have it be that as the framing story here because they're all together. So we're going to take this and throw this into the time period after number 15. Just like we had number 17 being after 15, where essentially it's just kind of them in space reminiscing about something. So it's that same general process of reminiscing while they're in space en route between 2 arcs ago and the previous main arc here. It's a story that's told by Mary Jo Duffy. Mary Jo Duffy will wind up being the main writer for the series after about issue number 70 or so. However, at this point, it is her first time writing for this series. Archie Goodwin is not involved in this issue. The regular artist, Carmine Infantino, however, is on board for this issue. So it's a shifting of writers, but not of artists in this particular case. What you have here is the Millennium Falcon is going up against some TIE fighters that they've run into, trying to stop them from going anywhere, and the tactic that Han happens to use to get rid of them is a tactic that Ben Kenobi has used in the past, and it causes Leia to reminisce and talk about an adventure from Obi-Wan's past. Now, it's not set in a specific time frame, at least not in this issue. It'll be pinned down later by other sources, but this one just says, during the time of the Old Republic. And you have an Obi-Wan here who looks a lot older than what we are used to, okay? He doesn't quite look like Ewan McGregor Obi-Wan. That's Obi-Wan, okay, in this image. Sure doesn't look like Obi-Wan the way we think of Ewan McGregor, but it is Obi-Wan that might be able to be extrapolated backwards from the look of Alec Guinness in A New Hope, of course. And, I mean, it's not really that much of a tale. He's on a luxury cruiser. The cruiser gets attacked by pirates, and the pirates are being drawn to the cruiser by something, only for them to wind up finding out that it's basically just this device that's there that's been programmed to do it, rather than any one individual being guilty of doing so, at least among those who are accused. There's not much to the story. It's a pretty dull story. But what makes it stand out, of course, is this is a flashback to the Old Republic era. This is the era that once Bantam starts publishing Star Wars novels and Dark Horse starts publishing Star Wars comics, both in 1991, they'll be told this era is entirely off limits to them. And yet Marvel wasn't given that restriction. Granted, this is before there was supposed to be an official continuity. It wasn't all meant to be one universe anyway. This was just a licensed spin-off type thing, so hey, have at it. But it is unique because of that. Up until quite a bit later, until we get to the late 90s, no other publisher is going to be allowed to touch this era, at least not in this degree. So we have an unusual story here. It's Obi-Wan, it's the Clone Wars era, presumably, given his age, the way that he looks here, or maybe taking place after the Clone Wars. Again, it's not going to be pinned down until later, so here it becomes all speculation when you're first reading this story back in 1979. Now, beyond this point, is there anything else of note? Not all that much. I mean, Mary Jo Duffy doing her first issue of the series, the fact that this is the first time that they've had a story that they've had to say this one takes place earlier in the storyline from the continuity standpoint here. Beyond that, nothing really of note. But for those things that make it unusual, it is usually one of the more fondly remembered stories of the Marvel era, even though, honestly, there's nothing really much in the story to be fond of. It's more known for its oddities than its story, and yet somehow the story gets credit for being so great. Yeah, not so much. If you want to read this these days, by the way, you can pick it up as we have with all the ones so far in Star Wars Omnibus a long time ago, Volume 1. We're nearing the end of this omnibus, but it goes all the way up through issue number 27, and this, of course, is issue number 24. So, for an oddity within the Marvel saga, it's an interesting one. But is it an essential read? Can it be skipped? Depends on your point of view. If you're looking for unique moments in early Star Wars publishing, I would say it's an essential read because of what it does that's different. Flashing back to the Old Republic times, a story with Obi-Wan Kenobi, a story written by Mary Jo Duffy before she becomes the main series writer. On the other hand, if it's essential in terms of reading for the overall Star Wars saga, no. It is not an essential read for general Star Wars readers. In that sense, can it be skipped? You have to approach this in a couple different ways. Can it be skipped in terms of the Marvel series? Yes, it doesn't add anything that you need for the Marvel series. Also, though, can it be skipped for those who are reading about the Clone Wars and Obi-Wan's early exploits? Unfortunately, the answer for that is also yes. You would have hoped that maybe because of the nature of the story, it might have been something where maybe it's not essential to the Marvel series overall, but maybe to the era in which the story's flashback takes place, but it's not. So with this basically being a standalone sort of throwaway tale, I have to say yes, in all senses, it can be skipped. Interesting that they would experiment with this type of storytelling, though. It would have been nice perhaps to see Marvel Comics do more with that, but they don't. So as an oddity, you might want to check out issue 24 of the Marvel series, whether it's in omnibus form, trade paperback form, or a single issue. Broadly speaking, though, it's not something that if you miss it, you're going to feel as though you've missed out on much. Trust me. With that, we close out this episode. Thank you for watching, and as always, may the Force be with the readers.